storm, page 3. And all that the disaster leaves floating is a master, the captain, we suppose, and we know nothing else about him, and his only action throughout the whole poem consists in holding some dice in his fist, 2 dice, no doubt, which he hesitates to throw into the furious waves, the same waves that will shortly swallow him up. The pages that follow describe what happens after the disappearance of the master. We never learn whether or not he threw the dice before being drowned. We know that he hesitated to carry out his gesture, but nothing is said as to the final decision. The uncertainties of the reader are obviously numerous, faced with such a strange scene. We do not know why the master is preoccupied with the throw of dice, when his ship has sunk and he will soon be submerged in his turn. We do not know what he is going to do, nor what he has done. All that is described to us after the scene evoking his hesitation, page 4, is that there is a whirlpool, no doubt the same one that swallowed up the ship and our hero, a vortex, around which circles the master's cap, his stock, along with the plume that adorned it, the feather. In the suit of the poem, the feather and the cap and feather sink in their turn into the vortex, and then, when there is nothing left on the waves, we are faced with a sea, I quote, some splashing or other, wherein nothing more takes place, page 9. Whence the declaration in capitals, page 9, rien n'aura eu lieu que le lieu. Nothing will have taken place but the place, page 9 and 10. It seems that nothing happened, that all the actors in the drama have been done away with by a sea now returned to its idle monotony. But suddenly, the nocturnal stellar sky seems to become animated, as if the stars have been put into movement, like a stellar throw of dice. It is the last page, 11.1. In place of the master's throw of dice, it is the sky that throws the dice, and the result shines out. A constellation unfolds. It is a septentrion that illuminates the sky, like the 7 points of 2 dice thrown together. There is, in this 11th page, a kind of figurative play at the end of the poem, where the form of the septentrion is reproduced twice by the form of the text. It is the only moment when the configuration of the text seems to possess a mimetic sense, as if to suggest that the stellar configuration of septentrion gives us the meaning of the entire drama. So much for the general progression of the poem. The text is, moreover, constituted of 3 principal clauses, the remainder being a scattering of interpolations that delay and complicate the completion of these clauses. The words of the principal clauses run through the whole of the text. The first proposition, which repeats the title, is un coup de dé jamais n'abolira le hasard. A throw of dice will never abolish chance. Written in large capitals from pages 1 to 9 with a series of interpolation. The second principal clause, which comes between page 10 and 11, is « Rien de la mémorable crise n'aura eu lieu que le lieu, excepté peut-être une constellation. Nothing of the memorable crisis will have taken place, but the place, except perhaps a constellation. The third principal clause is very different from the two preceding clauses, for it is a statement that stands alone from the rest of the text, visually as well. It is the final statement of the poem, which comes after the drama, after the throne, the stellar throne of the dice, like the moral of a fable, on which is interrupted by no interpolations. It reads simply, toute pensée émet un coup de dé. Every thought emits a dice throw. Thus the poem begins and ends with the same words, a throw of dice, a die throw. Un coup de dé. Finally, and it is a decisive point for our interpretation, the poem evokes an enigmatic number. This number, written with a capital N, appears twice during the poem. On page 4, on page 9. This number seems to designate the possible outcome of the master's die throw. The master has perhaps thrown the dice and thus produced a number. Now this seems to be charged with a type of higher and wholly enigmatic necessity. The first mention on page 4 introduces it thus. The master, the top of the page 4, the master, who appears suddenly in the midst of the shipwreck. The master, risen, inferring from this conflagration at his feet of the unanimous horizon that is prepared in the fist that might grasp it, the unique number that cannot be another. The unique number that cannot be another. What is going on here? The master floats face to face with the furious waves, and he infers from the conflagration at his feet, that is to say from the storm, the coming of a unique number, of an unparalleled necessity. In other words, the hero deduces that the conjunction of the storm and of his throwing of the dice, the result, will produce an absolutely singular number. My whole book bears upon this last statement, the unique number that cannot be another. What could this uniqueness of the number mean? And why does the master draw such a strange inference? Why would he deduce from the disaster of the furious waves a numerical necessity? Finally, if the production of this number seems so essential to him, why does he still hesitate, I quote, to open his hand, clenched far beyond his useless head, page 4-5. The master's fist is held above his head. This is what is described in page 4 and 5. The master's fist is held above his head. And his head is said to be useless. His head is said to be useless, for, as we shall see, it is already being struck by the waves, whose foam seems to produce upon his face the appearance of a barb soumise, of a submissive bird, and therefore this head seems to be decapitated, separated from his body, which we guess to be submerged up to the neck. Let's begin with the principal question. What does it mean, this unique number that cannot be another? It is a formulation that is difficult to understand at first sight, for the property of not being another is trivial, and doesn't pick out any one number in particular. Any cipher on number is identical to itself. 1 equals 1, 2 equals 2. And from this point of view, any number must be what it is and cannot be another. No number can be other than that which it is. But Mallarme's assertion is indeed that there is a unique number that, unlike all others, cannot be another, and it is produced by the poem. So what is this number, and what is the meaning of its property, if it is not to be understood in banal arithmetical terms? We must in fact understand this proposition by contextualizing it within what Mallarme calls, in one of his critical texts, the exquisite crisis of free verse. This crisis, I said, breaks out in 1887 with the appearance of the first collection of poems containing free verse, Les Palais Nomades by Gustave Kahn, a very close friend of Jules Laforgue. Following this first collection, the new form proliferates among numerous poets of the new generation. Such a novelty, such an abandonment of matter, is bound to create a controversy. This controversy is played out essentially between the advocates of the free verse and the Parnassians. The Parnassians, the school of Parnasse, is a French school of poetry which succeeded Romanticism and refused the lyricism of the self. It is at the time dominated by the figures of Leconte de Lisle and José María de Heredia. The quarrel bears upon the very definition of verse and of the poem. It is a question of whether free verse is poetry or not. For Heredia and Leconte de Lisle, free verse is not poetry at all, for a verse ceases to be a verse if it has no metric, no regular rhyme, no systematic count of syllables, in short, no fixed form. Free verse is thus not poetry. It is, they say, merely just a prose poem whose lines are interrupted at arbitrary points. But inversely, the most radical advocates of free verse, such as Gustave Kahn, claim that there is nothing poetic per se about metrical verse, or more exactly, metricity in verse. For Kahn, metricity in verse is but a political fabrication. According to him, it is Boileau, following Mallarme, who in the 17th century put in place a classical metric whose aim was to dictate to poetry just as the absolute monarch dictated over France, through a centralized state. Boileau introduced monarchist centralism to the world of literature and submitted everything to arbitrary rules in which true poetry would be corseted and which nearly destroyed the living genius of Racine. So what does Mallarme think about all this, about this quarrel? Mallarme adopts a most singular position in this quarrel, for he is one of the rare people to rigorously maintain that the two types of verse, free verse and metrical verse, are both true verse. For some years, Mallarme, along with Verlaine,